The subject of extraterrestrials has mystified humanity for countless generations. The question of, are we alone in the universe, has inspired us to push forward and advance as a species in the search for life in the great beyond. But to this day, judging by the way people generally treat the subject, it would appear that we have yet to make any form of substantial contact. Yet, the awareness of a deeper truth, that something is being hidden from us, is regularly being leaked to this day. Let's start with some basics, which would be UFOs, which we all know stands for Unidentified Flying Objects, or as they're starting to be called today, UAVs, Unidentified Aerial Vehicles. It was shortly after the 2 atomic bombs went off during World War II that UFO sightings spiked around the world. Hundreds of reports of UFOs began to emerge in the decade that followed the incident, and it was in 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico, that things got really interesting. Reports of a UFO crash landing in the shape of a flying disc inspired tremendous interest in possible alien activity as the US military quickly quarantined and cleaned up the site, claiming it was simply a weather balloon. This was really the beginning, and today, thanks to modern technology, especially cell phones, we have access to thousands, if not tens of thousands of seemingly unexplainable UFO sightings from around the world. My own personal favorite is the Dome of the Rock incident from 2011, where several independent people caught footage of a bright, glowing, and oscillating orb that descended over the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. After hovering over the sacred temple for several moments, it shot upwards with tremendous speed, disappearing into the sky. In more recent times, a video that was leaked several years ago was released by none other than the Pentagon, featuring 3 separate accounts of US military pilots attempting to track and follow incredibly fast-moving aerial ships, without any clue as to what they were. Along with curious phenomena like these, we also have a long list of ex-military officials who have either claimed to have seen or even had some level of interaction with these crafts, identifying that not only are they real, but they have no idea what they are. One particular interesting subject in this discussion is the work of Robert Dean, a retired command sergeant major who, after that job, became a ufologist and had been very public about his experiences with UFOs and ETs up until his passing away in 2018. At one point, he gave a presentation, the full thing of which you can find available on YouTube, accounting many of the things that he saw in the military and NASA. The most interesting of which being the story of what happened during the real moon landing. Now, many people today believe that the moon landing itself is a conspiracy, that it was faked because of certain things that stand out about the moon landing that don't make sense, such as why the crosshairs of a camera are appearing behind a particular object on the screen, or the strange objects in the reflection of the astronaut's visor. But what Robert Dean has described was that there was actually a real moon landing, but what happened was that upon arriving at the moon, what the astronauts found was that it was populated. There were, according to him, little alien people walking all over the place, ships flying through the, well, I'd call it air, but I guess they don't have oxygen up there, do they? This was such a shock to the astronauts that after their visit, they returned back with 40 rolls of film of what they saw, and NASA supposedly destroyed it. The thinking seems to be that the revelation of this truth was so out there that NASA buried the truth because of what would happen to the world if this was to get out. Now, I'm not saying that I'm in support of hiding the truth, but at the same time, think of how many religious beliefs would be shattered from this truth. How much chaos would be caused if all of a sudden, our entire global paradigm was to change in an instant. Again, I'm not saying that they're destroying the footage, if it did happen, was a good thing, but at the very least, trying to see things from every perspective. Specifically, there was an ex-CIA operative who spoke with AJ Plus at one point, and she described that the single most important thing that she learned from her time as basically a spy was that everyone believes they are the good guy. So even if this event did happen, whoever it is at NASA who controlled all of the information probably did it believing they were doing the right thing. We will return to Robert Dean at another point soon because he shared something else that was very interesting. However, first we have to discuss this. You may be familiar with a man named Bob Lazar, one of, if not the first, to come forward with inside leaks about the secret government UFO programs. He claimed to have been hired in the late 1980s to reverse engineer purported extraterrestrial technology at what he described was a secret site called S4, a site similar to and rather close to Area 51. He described that he had access to a recovered UFO ship and for several years was attempting to discover the secrets of how it worked. Lazar claimed that the propulsion of the studied vehicle was fueled by the chemical element with the atomic number 115, known today as moscovium, or E-115, which at the time was named unumpentium, since it hadn't been created yet. However, it was first synthesized in 2003 by a joint team of Russian and American scientists for real. He said that the propulsion system relied on a stable isotope of E-115, which supposedly generated a gravity wave after being excited by livermorium, element 116, during proton bombardment. He argued that the decay products brought about by the reaction between the two elements would include gravitons, a hypothetical quantum particle that is thought to be responsible for gravity. In his new Netflix documentary, he used the analogy that the craft is kind of like a bowling ball. If you were to put a ball onto a piece of fabric or your bed sheet and then proceeded to push down on the areas around it, the bowling ball would fall forward into the bends and gaps that you create around it. In this way, the craft would kind of just fall through space by distorting space-time around it, like in a continuous rolling motion. This is what allowed the vehicle to fly and to evade visual detection by bending light around it. He said it levitated silently, and when it was activated, he was unable to even put his hand on it, because the force would repel his hand away like a strong gravitational field. According to intel that he received while at S4, the ship, which was one of 9 that the military had access to, was originally from the twin binary star system called Zeta Reticuli, and had belonged to the Greys, which are the most common visual of aliens that we generally see today when you think of what an alien might look like. We even have an emoji for it. He also explained that the way that the military worked was so secretive that they wouldn't even let the various divisions studying the craft to communicate with each other, so progress on reverse engineering the technology was very slow. While one group would be working on controls, another on propulsion, and another on, well, you get the picture. But due to this isolation, they wouldn't easily be able to identify how the different parts of the ship were interconnected and worked together, and thus reverse engineering became very difficult. This was especially challenging because supposedly the ship was entirely interconnected. There weren't really any moving parts. It seemed to be one singular solid object. The seat and floor and panels and walls were all one singular material, with no sharp edges anywhere, an entirely different kind of machine than anything we're used to today. Now, after Lazar came out publicly about this, his life fell apart. Many people quickly looked into his life and found that he seemingly never had any of the education degrees that he claimed to have had. Yet, upon deeper investigation, documents stored away in his old university proved that he was telling the truth. Bob explained that after he came out publicly, he received a phone call from his ex-employers who said, "Do you have any idea what we're going to do to you now that you've done this?" And for many years, Bob suffered as much of his past was erased, and he was made to look like a fool in front of the masses. Now, Bob's story is a very interesting one. My highest recommendation is checking out the documentary he created with Jeremy Corbell called Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers, as well as the Joe Rogan podcast that they appeared on, where Bob goes deep into the story of what happened and what he learned. But Bob isn't the only one to come forward with some fascinating stories.